Hi, my name is Jeneen Miller with Pieces of Victory. Today we have on our show the founder of Survivors of Institutional Abuse, Jodi Hobbs. Jodi has suffered emotional, physical, and spiritual abuse in the same lockdown residential program that I was in. She is using the aftermath of turmoil to help many, many survivors. She is a transformational coach and a mentor geared towards those who have suffered severe trauma. Please welcome to the show, Jodi Hobbs.
Okay.
Hi, Jodi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Jeneen.
Thank you so much for being on the show. It's such an honor to have you here. And I am honored to tell everyone how you have taken emotional, spiritual, and physical abuse and transformed it into something amazing. You are the founder of Survivors of Institutional Abuse. It was founded in 2010. And I would like to hear more about what you're doing for the community, what you're doing for survivors. If you can tell us about your journey, how it all started, what you did with the aftermath of such a horrific experience.
Well, yes, we can talk all about that. I think it's important information to reveal that you and I went to the same place, which was called Victory Christian Academy. And we were actually there at the same time. And both of us have done things to raise awareness about institutional abuse simply because we were there and we saw and suffered horrific abuse. And so moving forward, I got married and had children. And so my trauma kind of started coming up because I hadn't dealt with any of the issues. And so it started coming up in various ways. And I was contacted by a reporter, and that kind of scared me and brought up more trauma. And so.
How many years later, after surviving Victory?
This was about 15 years later. It was quite a bit later. Yeah.
So are you telling me that you internalized it for the trauma for 15 years?
Yes. That's
wow. That's so sad.
It came out in various ways, and I knew it was there, but, because I had just, I was a new mom. I just wanted to put it on the back burner and not deal with it and focus on my children. But what I didn't understand is me not dealing with it caused, harm to myself. And, my kids had to see me go through some pretty difficult times, going through depression. And so had I dealt with it, had I come to terms with it earlier, I think things would have been different. But, we all have a life path to walk. And so this is mine.
And everyone deals with trauma differently too. Some choose to just not wallow in it and just move on and maybe be productive, and life is keeping them so busy that they're not thinking about it or not dealing with it. Maybe that's a coping mechanism too. I know I've done that before.
Oftentimes we're told if something terrible occurs, that happened in your childhood, you're an adult now, and so whenever I would have some issue or need to discuss, I had no one to discuss it with.
Right.
And, I didn't really, being married, and, it was just so difficult to share such intimate details. And so I thought, for my survival, the best thing to do was just not deal with it. And that was terribly wrong. I was wrong in doing that.
I think another contributing factor, if I can interject here, is that the preacher told us that we cannot contact each other. He called us liars, manipulators, and we believed that we were liars and manipulators, and we were programmed to think if we opened our mouths that no one would ever believe us.
I have a story to tell about. I had, I had my kids with me, and I was walking in the mall, and stroller, kids in tow, and I spot another girl from VCA, and you would think your reaction is, "Oh, hi, how are you doing? Oh, it's been so long." That was not my response. I was terrified. I was terrified that we had connection because, we were told in the program, you have no contact when you leave, and so we awkwardly said hello and quickly, took off in the other direction. And, to me, that was some severe kind of programming, if you will, because that it was an automatic response for me and her as well.
It was almost like you were living victory without being inside victory.
Yes, and I think that happens quite often with institutional abuse
Sure.
survivors. We just want to stay protected because we've been hurt so bad, and so we build up this wall, this barrier of protection. I think that happens quite often.
Michelle Urkelson had taken her life, but before that, I was friends with her because I felt more comfortable with her because she was an atheist. I was so terrified of interacting with another survivor that wasn't, because I was afraid that they were going to say to me, this was God's plan, you were a bad kid, we were bad kids, and they turned our lives around, and this was the best thing for us. I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to be in touch with any survivor. And it was when she took her life, I was devastated after that. And I started doing my research and reaching out to other survivors, and that's how I found you.
Michelle's story is a tragic one, and so often we hear of survivor deaths, and Michelle was in part of the reason why Sia is here today, because she was out there speaking about what happened to us, and I found her, and if I hadn't found her, I don't think Sia would be around.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome. That's awesome that you found her.
Yeah.
And it's awesome that I found her too.
And she did amazing work, and we're blessed because we had her in our life, and we miss her terribly.
I feel like she's still our guiding light with everything that we do, whether it's a book, whether it's film, or survivors of institutional abuse. I feel that she is there with us every step of the way.
With Michelle, we honor her when we do our work, and she's with us. But there was also other women who went to VCA and since have passed away. It's the same for them. We honor them for their lives, and the interesting thing is being in this environment, a survivor community. When we hear of a death, it's very triggering, jarring for us emotionally, for many reasons. One of them being that we were together in a very traumatic time, or they know of our traumatic time, and they appreciate and they are our friend, and then they pass away. It's almost it's overwhelming, the emotion that you feel, and we're seeing this more often than not. Because of the severe trauma that children that have been in these institutions suffer, they can't seem to manage their life, and many of them end up, on drugs, in prostitution, or in jail, dead. And so, I feel myself very fortunate to be able to be speaking out against institutional abuse because I still have my voice, and I'm still able to talk to everyone out there about these children and try to make a difference. And so I think we honor every single survivor that is no longer with us.
And that brings me to what survivors of institutional abuse is all about, helping survivors cope with the aftermath. And do you have some coping skills that you offer survivors on your website? Something that you're going to provide on your website. In addition, do you want to talk about the transformational coaching and mentoring?
Well, so I myself personally am a transformational coach. It took me, a really long time to kind of come to a place of healing and peace. And so I use the gifts that I've been given to help others. And so that's something that I do personally. SIA offers referral services to therapy. We have a therapist on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And so if anybody calls in, then we do referral services. They find a therapist in their area for them. And so the other thing that we're doing, which it will be happening soon, SIA is going to offer a lot of different various resources in the near future. We have some things launching, some campaigns launching that are going to be very beneficial for the survivor community to raise awareness, but also specifically to help survivors. We're looking at putting together some professional media that will help survivors aid in their healing. And so that's one thing that's going to be launched here relatively soon. So we're looking forward to that and excited.
Nice.
The other thing that I think is important to understand is SIA started with a concept and a passion to want to see change. And I myself and 4 others started SIA with the understanding that we were going to make an impactful change. And we wanted to see a whole lot of healing happening for these individuals that have been subject to institutional abuse. And so through the years, we've been able to do a lot of really good things, such as work on legislation. And we were featured on a documentary, and we've been in several news articles. I myself have done a lot of public speaking on the topic of institutional abuse. So we're part of a movement that right now is working to protect our youth, and we're honored to do that.
Speaking of protecting our youth, we did have a federal bill that we were trying to pass, which provides oversight in teen programs, and it was introduced in 2008. Is that correct? And then it was reintroduced. And now, what is the status? Can you tell us about that?
So there was the congressional hearings, and that was very impactful because it brought the conversation to the forefront in 2008. A federal bill was introduced by Congressman George Miller, and it never made it through. And it eventually got picked up by Congressman Schiff, and since then it has stalled. And so we're looking to hopefully get that bill relaunched. And what it would do is make each facility that houses youth for therapeutic reasons must be registered and licensed, and they must adhere to certain standards for the care of that child. And so we're really looking forward to that passing, working hard for it.
It does seem very discouraging that it hasn't been passed. And I know these things take time. It has been since 2008. But on the flip side of it, at least it's a thought process, at least it's out there, at least we're doing something about it. And the awareness is there. Speaking of awareness, when I went to the convention center for the first time in Long Beach, I was
the SIA convention, the very first SIA.
Yes, the very first Survivors of Institutional Abuse convention in Long Beach. I was in shock because I thought that my institution, Victory Christian Academy, was an isolated incident. I really thought that, and it wasn't until I attended the convention center when other survivors across the U.S. were telling their stories, and it was very similar to the scare tactics that were used at our facility. There was a common thread of control and fear and abuse, and I was just in shock. But I can only imagine other people out there that aren't aware of this and don't realize that this is an epidemic that is happening across our country, and you are bringing it to the forefront. So
I think it's important to have the conversation about legislation and holding those that house our children responsible for our children and the safety of our children. I think that's absolutely important. But I also think it's important equally that we do preventative, and raise awareness about this issue. And the way that we do that is by telling our story, is by coming forward and speaking about what happened to us, because in doing so, that brings healing to you and many others. I know when I shared with you, Jeneen, my story, and you shared with me, it was very healing. And so each time we do that, each time we have that conversation, it brings a little bit more healing, but it also brings awareness. So then, out there in society, if we're talking to our mom or dad, our brother, sister, or uncle, the lady at Carl's Jr., you're ordering food, whoever the person is that you're talking to, you're having the conversation. I have made, my experience very public, because not because it was easy to do, it was very difficult.
Sure.
And it was a decision that, essentially changed my life.
I also feel like being part of this support group is very empowering too. To be a part of survivors of institutional abuse has been a very empowering experience, and it has helped with my confidence level and communicating what goes on behind closed doors across the U.S.
Well, I think we're starting to have that conversation more and more, and this is why I encourage everybody that has suffered severe trauma to start talking about it, start having the conversation. Because right now, in the environment that we find ourselves in today, we have the opportunity to impact powerful change. Everybody's calling this the new normal. Well, I think, and I think I saw a Facebook meme that said something like, we have the opportunity to make things better, not the same. And so I think that's absolutely true. And so we have an opportunity here, to protect our youth. And so this is why we continue to talk about it, continue to have the conversation, and we urge you to do so. It's not easy, like I was saying, to share your story, to, talk about it. The first time, especially when I shared my story, it was so awkward. you know, but I wrote it down, and it was very freeing. And then I eventually started talking about it, having the conversation specifically first with my parents, because they had no idea about the abuse. And so that was a difficult conversation. And then, of course, I shared with my husband and children.
How were you able to mend the relationship with your parents? I understand how difficult it is to confront your parents with something so traumatic. How was the support system? Was it very difficult? How did you get through it?
That's a really good question. I just had, such a drive to speak my truth and to share. At that moment, I was ready. I think sometimes it takes a little while for us to kind of prepare ourselves and get ready to kind of face the trauma. And so that's what I did. And so having the conversation with my mom, my father's passed away, so I couldn't have the conversation with him, but having the conversation was challenging, because, of course, she didn't want to hear that anything terrible had happened to me, because she had sent me to a place, right? So she was very defensive, and rightly so. I would be defensive as well as a parent. I would hope that whatever I did as a parent would benefit my child, not harm my child. And so,
So there's a lot of guilt going on, a lot of guilt. And
yeah, I told her, I said, I started the conversation by saying, I don't blame you for any of this. I just need you to hear what happened. And I said, I think you were deceived just as much as anyone else. And so her hearing me say this removed that. And so we were able to have a conversation that was very productive. And so, of course, we had many more since then. And it's not easy, because, you have to kind of heal that family dynamic. And, we're always working towards that. Family's hard, but I think it's important to try to strive for healing whenever possible. And so this is kind of the conversation that Sia wants to have, is it starts with you, and a hard conversation with yourself. if you're avoiding, if you're not doing things that are putting you in a kind of a high vibrational state, positive thinking, if you're more in a lower vibrational state, living in kind of fear, anxiety, depression, um, there's a reason that you're feeling that way, and it's time to take care of yourself. It's time to do the right thing for you. And so, what that is start working on the trauma recovery. And so, this is what I talk about when I do my transformational coaching.
I think you're absolutely right. It does start with you. If you're at a better state, if you're in a better state energetically, you're coming across in a different light to someone that you
Well,
want to share what
so,
happened.
so if I am in a trauma state, then I'm going to respond to the world in a trauma state.
Exactly.
And then if other people are in a trauma state, they're going to respond back to me in a trauma state. So we're talking trauma. It's not a normal conversation. And so,
It's almost like law of attraction.
yes, I think that's absolutely true. I think that law of attraction is, something that makes sense. But I think it's important to understand that negotiating your surroundings. What does your environment look like? Are you happy? Asking yourself some very important questions. So then you can take the moves to make yourself happy. You can do the things that you want to do. But that starts with a conversation. That starts with you. And once you've done that, then you can move forward and then start having that conversation with another person. You can't, hurt people, and healed people heal people. That was another meme that I saw on Facebook.
I think that survivors need to be very careful too of who they allow in their circle of trust, because if you allow someone that is maybe negative, abusive, it can be more traumatic for them, and they're not.
The interesting thing about this is when you're in a kind of trauma state, it's hard to negotiate your surroundings because that's kind of your normal,
Okay.
right? And so, because it is your normal, you think it is normal, and so having the conversation means that you have to look outside of yourself as well. It's kind of I tell the story of kind of being like an eagle and soaring above and looking, at your world from an above view. And if you can do that, then you can start kind of having this conversation of healing with yourself. I think that you brought up a really good point that we have to be very cognizant of who and what we let around in our environment. There's all kinds of groups out there that profess to be good, but in the long run, they probably aren't so good. And so I just went on a show recently talking about cult abuse, and the kind of the cult-like tendency is around. There's organizations around that will take advantage, and there's groups that will take advantage, and it's interesting because we struggle going through trauma. We struggle with self-identity. And so it's very easy for us sometimes to go into an environment that might not be good for us because our identity, our value, our worth is fuzzy. And so these are things that survivors work on continually. And I don't think people that haven't suffered trauma kind of understand this, but it's an ongoing kind of healing process for a trauma survivor.
I've I've grown to be very selective. I rather have less surroundings and just very good quality. I'm very selective of my environment. And I feel like you can be the captain of your own ship, and you can choose who you want to allow in your life that's positive.
Life is a choice. It's all about choices. I started something called Bring Your Own Change, And basically, it's talking about be the change that you want to see in your life. And so you have the opportunity to make choices every single day in your life. And, you know, whether it's what to have for breakfast or am I going to yell and scream today or am I going to have a positive day? So you have the choice to empower yourself to be whatever it is that you want to be. I know it's easy for me to say that. Believe me, when people said that to me, I would laugh at them, and then I would start crying. I would ball up in the corner, but it's absolutely the truth. It is absolutely the truth. It starts small, appreciating a beautiful sky, going out maybe and walking in nature, or doing your favorite art project. Start small, and start bringing in that positivity into your life that way. And if you have a bad day, it's okay. You can start tomorrow. you know, and so I talk about that. Baby steps and really honoring yourself and having self-care where if you're in a circumstance or situation, you can remove yourself, you have control of that. So I talk about boundaries and things that we weren't really kind of taught, you know and of course, I, believe me, struggle myself. And I think that's why it's so easy for me to help another, is because I struggle with these very same things daily.
I feel that SIA has a lot of positive tools for survivors. It's wonderful, and I'm so appreciative of it. So
Thank you.
thank you so
Thank
much. I would like to talk about the banning of conversion therapies. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that?
so conversion therapy, I'm really encouraged by the fact that it's been banned, across the nation pretty much. And most states have banned conversion therapy. Now, there is in some states a religious exemption, which, obviously I'm not too happy about that, but it's a step in the right direction. And conversion therapy is very similar to the tactics used in these therapeutic programs, coercion. It's just for a different reason. It's kind of the same methodology. And so, if we understand that conversion therapy is bad and harmful for our youth, then we need to understand these kind of therapeutic practices are wrong and harmful for our youth. And so, I think we're moving in that direction. I think it's a huge positive win for us. And I'm encouraged that less children will have to be subjected to that kind of abuse.
It's very disheartening to hear that there's a stipulation on the banning these conversion therapies when you hear, well, religious organizations are exempt from this. They're the culprit. They're the ones that develop the conversion
Well, the
therapy.
interesting thing is, you and I both were abused at a religious therapeutic boarding school.
Right?
And many of these therapeutic boarding schools happen to be religious, So um, this is how they're able to kind of stay hidden, is because they don't have to be licensed, because in many states there's a religious exemption, so they don't have to be held accountable in any way, shape, or form.
And I'm all about religious liberty. I'm all for that.
Too.
But didn't say to abuse the children.
Well, here's the thing. I am all for, civil liberties and all of that, but children should be allowed those same civil liberties. And if they're being put in harm's way, they should be able to speak up and say that they don't want to be abused today. They should have a voice. And so this is what we're talking about as civil liberties for children. This conversation must be had.
I agree. And to paint a picture for those who aren't accustomed to what goes on in these places, you're on lockdown with no communication, no phones, no letters. You can't get an attorney. You have more rights in minimum and maximum security prison. And how are the children going to reach out for help? They cannot. And that's why it's so important to have this federal bill to provide oversight in these programs, because there isn't.
Yes, because I was abused in one of these programs. Obviously, that's a huge focus. But we also focus on other areas of institutional abuse. Institutional abuse can happen in any institution.
Sure.
So that can be in churches, in schools, and juvenile detention center, residential treatment centers, and so group homes, and anyone that kind of houses children. Um, and I think many times parents or people that are putting children in these facilities don't seem to understand that there is a potential for abuse anytime that you put your child in another person's hands. And so you run the risk of your child being damaged and scarred for life. And so I think it's really important for parents to start having that conversation that this is harmful. And it, I think we can do it better, don't you? I
I
think that,
agree. And do you want to talk about the alternatives to
yeah.
parents that are contemplating sending their child to a conversion therapy, a reform school, boot camp for kids? What are the alternatives?
So to me, the alternative would be that the family remains together when possible. And if we can do that, then we utilize the community resources to engage with the child as best as possible. To me, I think being a parent means that, the child comes into our life and we are to raise them and train them up to become the young adult that they're meant to be. And so that means that we need to allow their creativity. We need to help them understand how to make decisions. These are all things that we as parents must do, but not in such a way that is cohesive or controlling or manipulative. Um, we want to teach our children better skills than that. And so I think we need to talk about rather than let's go send our child to one of these places. Let's have the conversation of maybe we need to be better parents. Maybe we need to have some parenting classes. I'm looking at preventative in the long term, right? If we can look at a different way of solving these problems with our children, then perhaps we wouldn't even be having this conversation about these facilities.
That's beautiful. That would be so beautiful to have more parents do the alternative and work with you with that. And I feel that you have taken such a negative experience and used it as tools to help other people. You are so compassionate towards many, and I think survivors of institutional abuse is wonderful. It's helped me, it's helped many other people. And
I have to say, Janine, we've been knowing each other a really long time. And I just want to say I am extremely proud of you. I have seen you developed into a beautiful, brilliant, empowered woman. And I'm proud to call you a friend.
oh, thank you, Jodi. Thank you so much. Thank you for being on the show. And do you have anything else to add to?
Just thanks for having me. And I look forward to many more conversations. And, just to the survivor community and trauma survivors everywhere, we're not alone. We can do this together.